Right then, so before we start on what actual level 1 assurance is, what is assurance? Assurance is the act of seeking confidence or certainty that risks are properly being assessed and controlled. Network Rail's management assurance system or processes are set out in our manual and in our assurance framework. Management systems are based on a plan, do, check, act cycle. So in this case, it's an assessment and understanding of risk, how to control that risk, monitor, and then use and act upon that learning. There are 3 levels of assurance, otherwise known as 3 lines of defence. So the first one, which you should all be very much aware of, is that local management control. It's the confirm and test activities. So that includes things like compliance monitoring, inspections, management reviews, and self-assurance itself. So it's done in-house, it's done by yourselves, it's done the ones who are in control of risk. Level 2 provides corporate oversight. That includes things such as functional audit, engineering verification, and deep dive reviews. And that's usually an activity that's done independently. Level 3 is another independent challenge, and that's kind of, again, an assurance, another layer to check the risk control policies. And that includes audits done by internal audit, Network Rail internal audit, and external organisations such as the ORR. So the key here is level 1 assurance really is to confirm that the activities are taking place and to test whether the controls are sufficient and being worked as prescribed. Level 1 assurance is a business as usual activity. Activities are defined within many control documents and standard documents that we'll be all familiar with. It's intrinsically linked to risk and asset management, and it's a key aspect of the Swiss cheese model. It's ultimately a means to check that your house is in order. It's definitely not a dark art. It isn't a tick in the box exercise. It's not additional tasks. It isn't something that should be done to you, and it's not seen as a nice to do. So all of this might be a case of stating the obvious, but as we move on to the why, we do see that we're not always delivering on the expectations and requirements. Level 1 assurance comes up time and time again. It's a common theme detailed in investigations, deep dives, practical problem solving, RABE and ORR reports. Some examples are shown there, but there are many, many more examples across all disciplines and all topics. The issues tend to centre around things like what level 1 assurance is meant to deliver, what part it plays, how intelligence from level 1 assurance isn't acted upon, and how findings from level 1 assurance aren't really put together so that it produces a kind of an overarching risk profile. Ineffective level 1 assurance plays a part in incidents of varying tasks, varying scales. The themes of wrong-side failures is yet another example of ineffective level 1 assurance. It demonstrates that if you had applied the correct application of level 1 assurance, it may have helped to mitigate or reduce the effects. Areas found to be lacking include things like inspection integrity, self and site assessment, annual risk assessment, so your 053, your 054s. There's a lack of root cause analysis, so that results in repeat faults. And there's the lack of systems thinking, so that's not paying heed to the cumulative effect of low-level faults or combination faults. Level 1 assurance really acts as a stress or a pulse test. It aims to identify the issues before that risk increases. It provides a framework for you to document and quantify those issues so then you can escalate them if needs be. It's a means to demonstrate and apply control. And in essence, it allows for self-reliance. And as an aside, it can reduce findings at level 2 audits. So how do we go about actually performing level 1 assurance? So there are several defined activities. None of those shown should be a shock to you, a surprise. You should all be familiar and they're all recognisable. They all follow that PDCA principle, so it's all about understanding the risk, applying the controls, measuring and monitoring, and then learning from the outputs. So if we take some of those in turn, if we take line manager monitoring, for example, it's a task that you do day in and day out. You have a TEF, you review it, you sign it. You've got your physical asset inspections. You've got annual reviews. So again, that might be a patrol diagram review, your inspection frequencies, and you've got things like plan do reviews and visualisation, and things feed into that, whether that be your compliance or maintenance reports. You've got competence management, so that's your ACCs, that's your one-to-ones and your performance reviews. You've got planned assurance inspections, so that's PGIs. And you've got management self-assurance, whether that be technical or the management part of it. And you've got safety conversations, both informal and formal. Now, when these things are taken individually, it means that you can correct the issue at source, but actually if the outputs are combined, you can kind of see where the risks are, both current and emerging. And it's definitely worth combining all of these activities, and you don't need a flow diagram or a process to tell you to do that. So if you pick something up from your TEF, you maybe have a chat with the section manager, the supervisor. That may then link onto a quick discussion about some of the competence, some of the TL competencies that you'd need to undertake that. So in essence, what I'm saying is it's an instinct thing that you do. You don't need to be told to do level 1 assurance today, just as you wouldn't be told to do, I'm doing safety today. Another example is something that I did myself when I was an ATME. Back in the day, we were given the task of the responsibility of becoming lift planners. So obviously you go on the course, you do the mentorship, but I was quite aware that it was an area of kind of weakness at our delivery unit. So it was a case of actually not confirming and testing my team, it was about confirming and testing myself, much to the machine controller's joy when I rocked up. So the key really is to integrate these activities, so to make sure that you're not just fulfilling a quota, you're not doing it just for the sake of it. So dependent upon the activity as well, or the application, there's a variety of sources of where you'd actually store these findings. That might be on a particular TEF, it might be on some of the systems that are shown, some that you'll be familiar with, CMO, track risk registers, etc. It's quite important where these things are actually stored, because then it gives you an idea, as I say, about building up that risk profile. So you may have seen this kind of sawtooth pattern. It often accompanies asset failures, this repeating pattern of we're repairing it, improving, repairing, improving, and then unfortunately you then get a failure, asset failure happens. So this may or may not be an exaggerated example, but it is a means to kind of emphasise the opportunities missed. So if we consider the example of repeating track geometry faults, which may well have sat as a low-level combination fault, a low-level fault before actually going to actionable. If we looked at this kind of a life cycle over 2 years, you'd have multiple things that you'd have done on that piece of track. So if we say it's a track cat 2, plain line, and you're following TRK 001, just to give some kind of scope here, you've got 52 BVIs potentially, 6 section supervisory visual inspections, each with a walkout and trace review. You've got 26 track patrollers forums, 8 track geometry runs, each accompanied with 8 trace track geometry reviews, 104 TME PDRs and potentially 104 SM PDRs. And that's aside from all of the many safety conversations you may have had, your PGIs, your managed self-assurance, and that's not including the other eyes, ears and measurements that kind of all get thrown into that mix. So really, is there a question here over quantity of activities? Are you doing too much where you don't need to and too little where you do? So this, of course, is where ragging of standards comes into play. Amber deviation, risk-based maintenance. And I'm a true advocate of kind of testing the water and going and kind of changing and shaking things up a bit. But what I'm not an advocate of is just doing it for the sake of doing it. You have to really understand why it's a worthwhile activity to do. If you consider the times when you've had an off day, we all have an off day, and one of those spinning plates comes crashing down, invariably nothing happens, thankfully, but it's because of all those other barriers, all of those other activities are preventing that from then subsequently turning into an incident. If you just think on all of the could have beens that actually were mitigated and subsequently controlled, so it doesn't justify not doing it without good reason. That succession of confirming and testing prevents or mitigates and cushions the result. So going back to the asset failure, if quantity isn't an issue, or actually maybe it is it a connecting the dots issue? So are we not using all of the outputs from these activities to form a picture of that current and emerging risk? And if it's not that, or maybe it is, it's a combination of that again, is it a quality issue? So I'm going to take some of those kind of predefined activities one in turn and just pose a few questions to yourselves. So if we consider trace trajectometry review, now you may not necessarily think of that immediately as a level 1 assurance activity, but actually you are doing a confirm and test procedure all the way through it. So if we think about trace trajectometry review, how regularly and in depth are these reviews? Are actions taken and tracked? Do you review the actions from previous trace review? And does it cover both fault scoping and physical intervention effectiveness? So there's a few things just to kind of question yourself there. If we consider planned assurance inspections, do you cover a good sample of sites, or do you keep going to the same ones through ease because you haven't got any time? Are they a mixture of predefined locations, or actually are you using the intelligence to actually go and visit sites that need inspecting? If you consider your plan do reviews, is the detail that you're reviewing, is it presented in a way that's easily digestible? So are you scrolling through lots of data, lots of tabs, or actually is it quite apparent what you need to be reviewing? And ultimately, are you able to deliver on the actions arising from each of those PDRs, or is it a case of deja vu week on week on week? Then if we consider managed self-assurance, how often are there no actions raised, and is it ever flagged? And does anyone ever question if the actions repeat or become overdue? So it's just some kind of food for thought there, really, about the quantity, the quality, and the active use of the outputs can really have an effect on the effectiveness of level 1 assurance. And ultimately, remembering that those activities are there for you and your teams to confirm that your house is in order. So aside from the incidents and potential ineffective level 1 assurance, there are some great examples of level 1 assurance on display each and every day. If we take a few examples, so we've got TME self-assurance, one of the examples on West Coast route. They've taken this process of, they're basing it on a theme per period. So they're taking your foundation activity, so nothing that's a surprise. So BVIs, SVIs, hot weather management, vegetation, RBM management, and they're kind of having a bit of a more scratch under the surface each period. So the questions are based about things like FAP, the questions are from FAP, EV, identified gaps and trends, and it's all collated in one location, so that's within the North West and Central Power BI app. But the findings are ragged, so it means that actually you're not just looking over reams and reams of actions, you can at a glance determine from both a local level and a national level, a route level, where your kind of hotspots are, where you might be actually lacking. And some of the comments from some of the TMEs are that it brings massive benefits because actually it's kind of rubber stamping the foundation activities that they need to undertake, that it's one of the best things that they do each period because actually it's allowing them to say, I really need to focus, I need to put my time on doing this activity because it's really important, and it really gives them a kind of a feel for where the team is slipping. And as I mentioned earlier, it's quite noticeable. When you get that kind of ingrained, it does kind of show through in then subsequent audits. Now, another great example that I've seen recently at some recent audits is TME inspection and rigour. So again, something that isn't a surprise to you, but it really, really kind of shines through that when you've got a TME who's kind of picking up both positive and negative feedback, and then kind of working through it. So as I say, it's not necessarily following a process. It's not having to say, right, after that, I do that. It's actually picking up from, they've gone out on a TME inspection, picked up some issues, started to do a bit of a sample check of the TEFs, and then it led to a discussion with the section manager, a bit of a competence review, a bit of an upskilling session. So it wasn't a finger-pointing exercise by any means. It was actually a means to empower their teams and work to the solution themselves. So that's a really clear example of level 1 assurance being undertaken effectively. Now, it's a great privilege undertaking audits, some may say not, but it's good to be able to dip back into the workings of the DU. And incident management is often commended for the all hands on, all deck, teamwork and commitment shown. And of course, that is something that needs to be done, and that's understandable. But what is more commendable, and actually something that one of the other presenters said, is you don't want those incidents, you want the boring. But I do really see it at audit, where you've got a section that is on top of all of this. You can get that same buzz as that you'd feel when you're actually out on incident recovery, and you kind of get that pride, that sense of pride, and that teamworkness, the teamwork and seamlessness kind of does shine through. So, as I said, all the different data and technology we've been talking about today, I would definitely encourage you to use the data and reporting that is available to you. Ultimately, it's a key part of level 1 assurance. Let it do some of the legwork for you, consider the trends, emerging risk, and then explore those topics further. Let it mould your PGIs, your desktop reviews, and feed it into trace review. If there are lots of signs that things possibly aren't working, it's definitely worth taking a look. And even though the tools and technology can be overwhelming, you really need to find a mix that works for you. And as I say, do use all of those things, because actually it reduces your legwork and allows you to focus on the things that are important. So level 1 assurance really does epitomise what being an engineer is. The key ingredients, as some are shown there, it is really about following your nose. It's about questioning and testing. It's about pulling from a variety of sources and actually connecting the dots. It's about problem solving and investigation. Success is achieved through a real recognition that these are your bread and butter tasks, and they're really for you to oversee your own destiny. It's about clear and regular communication, creating a simple but a consistent means to document, acknowledgement of and filling in the gaps. Now, whether that's gaps that you've picked up through assurance or whether it's within the processes themselves. It's about competent and capable teams, rigour in standards and controls application, and really remembering that everyone has a part to play. It's about teamwork and pride. So in summary, we have covered level 1 assurance, the what, the why and the how. The what is it's an integral maintenance and technical activity which supports good asset and risk management. Why, it's a key means for you to identify and resolve issues early and ultimately confirm that what you and your teams are doing is working. See it as keeping your houses in order. The how, it's those confirm and test activities. Numerous business as usual activities when conducted effectively, remembering that it's the outputs from the process, not just the process itself, that allows correction at source and provides intelligence which should be used to connect those dots. So a few things that I'd like you to take away, if you will, are you and your teams undertaking effective level 1 assurance? So are the activities embedded and the outputs are actually acted upon? That may be the corrective action or the detail to generate that picture of risk. Consider what the perceived or actual blockers are which are preventing you from performing effective level 1 assurance, and look to remove or reduce these. So that may be a need to seek clarification or support with the activities, how to deliver and best use the outputs, or to simply best utilise your own time and resource that you have. And as a continuous improvement activity, highlight the gaps in level 1 assurance that need to be plugged, whether that be both locally or nationally, and please do share these as well as your thoughts and improved ways of working, because ultimately as practitioners you do have the answers. Thank you for listening.